view, the Department of Corrections should not be running the city's public burials. One small anecdote, because of again, what we explained before, the restrictions that are there because of the Department of Corrections, we've gotten, there's personal stories of people, for example, who live in other states, who will happen to be in New York for a short period of time, and they know that they have, for example, in some cases, like their father is buried at Hart Island, but because of the waiting lists and the limited amount of visitations, can't make it to visit their father's grave. And I mean, there's restrictions like that, real restrictions on real people, that are very difficult. And with the Department of Corrections there, it's not really possible to get around those restrictions. So that's the idea behind it. What the details of the future of Hart Island, that our bills do not talk about that and do not determine that. What our bills do is create a forum so that can be decided with input from all of the stakeholders, including the community. And that forum will be on October 24th again.
Can we ask them a question?
Excuse me?
Tom.
Yes. Okay, because I want to address specifically the resolution. I am, and for many years, I'm an officer of the Civic Association, City Island Civic. In 2014, Melinda, who's here somewhere, she made a presentation on Hart Island. There was no bill before the city council at the time, and the Civic voted to support the concept of looking into transferring jurisdiction. And as I understand, and I believe that had a big factor. That was 2014. Then the bill was introduced in 2015. That was a big factor in the community board here voting to support it based on City Island support. But the Civic has never voted on the legislation, and in the September meeting we did, and the Civic Association overwhelmingly opposes it. And one of the specific reasons, there are others, is as you say, there's nothing yet addressing the transportation. And City Islanders, far and wide, are really concerned because there's no parking. Fordham Street is a narrow street. It's a problem that if the amount of people that want to go to Hart Island increases, it's going to be a traffic and a parking nightmare. So the Civic Association opposes it without first establishing a alternate transportation mode. So that's what I have to say.
All done.
Okay,
Bob,
first off,
you want to let him answer that, because I think that's the study that they're referring to. You want-
well, I think that was a statement, not a question, right?
Yes.
Right. I know it's a study. That's my problem.
But there
It's
wasn't a
study.
question there, right?
Correct. No,
So there's nothing to answer.
Right.
Right? Okay. All right, first off, 906A, to transfer the parks. This is the same bill we voted on in 2015. It hasn't changed. Is that correct?
It has.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
They have to answer.
It was just reintroduced.
I don't believe it's changed.
There's been no changing in the bill. Okay, so my first and foremost feeling and opinion, okay? I realize we get new members all the time. I was here when they first introduced Hart Island. When Hart Island was first discussed, I'm a former chair of Parks Committee, actually, all right? And I've been a member all these years. But on any committee, once a community board has made a vote, to go back and say we're going to change that vote or readdress that vote, I don't think that's right, because that just opens the door to every vote we ever took. All right? This committee, the full board made a vote, they made a decision, I think that should stand. That's my first comment. Now, I do have other comments or questions. The restrictions on parks, should it be taken over, it means it's going to stay a cemetery and nothing else is going to change, is that correct?
I don't know.
We don't know. This is right. That's
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem. That's the problem. Right?
so our bills don't address that. The forum is part of the decision-making process for that. That which, as Emily explained, with the RFI, RFP, that's what the administration is trying to decide at this point. Our bill just ensures that it's not the Department of Corrections and the best other agency.
I do know that Parks Department has jurisdiction over other non-active cemeteries throughout the city. And that they have always maintained it and never had any plans to do anything different. I would presume the same would be true here. The other question that I want to know is, as far as the ferry service. We have new ferry service here in the Bronx. To me, it makes perfect sense to simply add a new stop rather than have the ferry service leave from City Island. Is that being considered at least?
So this bill would require the Parks Department and the Department of Transportation to consider exactly those factors. So to look at, for example, potential increase in interest in visiting the island, for example, significant changes in travel, like to the City Island Ferry or others, and to develop a plan to respond to those changes and ensure that there's adequate service.
Now, the other three bills, have they come out of committee?
None of these bills.
So none of the bills have come out of committee, so there's really nothing for us to vote on until they come out of committee, because they haven't been finalized.
No, they're fine.
No, no,
They could come out of committee differently than when they went in.
technically, but now.
Okay, generally, the board does not vote on bills while they're still in committee. Generally. Okay,
Well, I'm sorry, Bobby, what's the point of the voting if a bill passes a committee at that point?
it has to go to the full board before it passes.
Once it
Once it
comes out
comes
of
out of committee, it's finalized. All the changes have been made.
Once it comes out of committee, it's baked. You wanna get it before it comes out of committee, not afterwards.
Okay. On intro, in other words.
Right.
Okay, so the three bills really aren't before us right now. The transportation plan, because there really is nothing there. So something more has to come out before it comes out of committee. They're not gonna bring out a transportation plan that says, what should we do with ferry service? That's not really much of a bill.
No, the bill is requiring them to come up with a plan.
Okay,
That's what the bill does.
I see. So, all right. So the only thing we really voted on in the past, though, was the transfer to parks. And we were very much under the understanding at that time that nothing was going to change. All right? As far as how they were going to get there, that was still open for discussion. But since then, we have new ferry service, which makes much more sense than trying to establish a new ferry on City Island. Or expanding this ferry on City Island. Because it's just one more stop along the way. You have service between Manhattan and the Bronx now, so for them to stop at Hart Island is kind of a no-brainer. So this way, City Island would not be affected in any way, shape, or form.
I mean, again, there are a lot of options, and that's what they would have to come up with a plan.
Okay,
And I would think they'd
thank
be
you.
looking at all those options. But
Thank you.
Before we go to the
More at
public,
the table, and then I'll go to the audience.
I do have, we can do it while we're discussing, but I do have a PowerPoint presentation of slides of Hart Island that might give context to folks that haven't been there before, to actually see photos of Hart Island. Is that permissible, or do you think that's a good idea?
We have the computers up still.
Do you want me to pass it over?
I don't see that's a problem.
Oh,
it's gotta
never
go that
mind.
way. He's gotta
It's
come this way.
plugged in.
there's a password or.
I would like to question who took those.
It goes on.
I don't remember.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember. Right there.
I got
I
it.
would take them out. I don't wanna see photos that might have been doctored.
You wanna come down here and show us these pictures?
Broad, huh? You can broad.
Look at the
I guess
photos
Mark
first.
put you on here for a reason.
Well, where are they at?
City,
All the way down to that PowerPoint, up, right, one more, right there.
Oh my God, the conspiracy theories. You gotta love it. The first time I'm even hearing he's got photos, I didn't even know about this.
Tour allowed.
Photos.
new app. Let's see if this.
Make that bigger now, just scroll down.
Oh, here we go.
okay. Look at that, very well maintained.
Somebody want to tell us what we're looking at?
If you scroll up a little bit, it'll tell you. No,
No.
oh, I'm sorry, scroll down. Each photo has a explanation.
It's pretty well maintained over.
It's very well maintained.
Better than Pelham Bay Park.
Wow is right.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Better than the showroom. A little picnicking. Little barbecues.
Is that the old military base portion of it?
That was the,
It says it on the bottom of the photo,
Oh,
I
I
think
can't
it's Old
see.
Hospital, if I remember right.
Okay.
Keep going
That's
up.
that's the old Navy base.
Okay, that's what I
That's
meant, yeah, okay.
That's the church.
Chapel,
Which could fall down at any second.
yeah, a lot of it is dilapidated.
Oh, it's a lot
When were these pictures taken?
They have to be raised.
I got it as a like a PowerPoint. It's like a news article type thing.
2018.
I saw 2018 on YouTube.
Yeah, of course.
A website.
Okay.
It's got a
It's from,
website.
it's from an article.
This lady had her hand up first.
I think there's more if you keep going.
Oh, there's one?
I think
No,
I think I got, yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Well, oh, you had any other questions at the table first, sorry.
What
is your end date for putting bodies on the island? Because you have over 1 million bodies on there now. Do you guys have like an end date when you're gonna stop putting bodies? Because that would solve a lot of questions here. Like, when are you gonna stop the burial process?
They said it's gonna last about 10 more years.
10 more years?
So again, that's what the RFI/RFP is for, is to have people who actually bury people, like experts in the field, to determine what would be the best process for the public burial process. At the hearing, Department of Corrections shared that they believe that there's about 8 to 10 years left of space on the island. But of course, that's also why we have but going back to the RFI/RFP process, you know, maybe there's a way to expand room on the island, maybe there isn't, but that's kind of what the RFI/RFP process is for. And I'm happy that you mentioned there is over 1 million people buried there. I want to reiterate before, like what I said before, that the speaker and the council has made it very clear that we want this to be a respectful cemetery. There are people that visit year round that have, you know, various experiences going to the island. But yeah, so we'll see what comes out of the RFI and RFP, and I think that we should expect at the forum, hopefully, to hear from some people that have ideas as far as like what this can look like.
Any other questions from the judge? The table first, the young lady in white over here
Okay,
first.
with all due respect to the procedure
Can we
that.
give her the mic? I can't,
I'll be loud.
but we have to have it on the recording. We have to have it on the recording.
Okay. With all due respect to the procedures that have been put up, there are term limits and policies of good government require that the people of this district be governed by the people who are currently appointed to this board. The reason why the resolution from 2015 recites the INT numbers 103 and 104 is because it's the intention that that support expires when the bill supports. We get a new city council every 2 years. Whatever was voted on 2015, 103, 104, they're no longer pending. There are 4 new items pending, and that's what needs to be addressed. That's just point of good governance. The people who voted for 2015 were under the misinformation that transfer to parks meant preservation. That is not correct. People know that now. Yankee Stadium was built on a park. Look at all the commerce that's going on at Wave Hill or in Central Park. Parkland does not mean preservation, okay? Then I know that our speaker, Corey Johnson, as a man who's living with HIV, he knows that if he were to have died of AIDS during the time that AIDS was an unknown medical crisis, he knows his family would have been forced to allow him to be buried on Hart Island because no undertakers would have processed his body. I know that if I died before I turned 5, I was a ward of the state of New York, and I would have been buried on Hart Island too. Okay? There's a lot of misinformation happening here because it is not hard to visit Hart Island. After the hearing at City Council, I went home that night and I said, it's time for me to take a visit. I went online and filled out the form. The following morning at 9:27, and I know it was exactly 9:27 because that number has important memory for me. I received a call from Mrs. Calvert from her office on Rikers Island, and she told me over the past years that she's been working there was only one person who had to go off the waiting list to visit Hart Island. She told me I could visit in September. She said, but there's a boat on Saturday. You can be on standby. If somebody doesn't come, you can go. So the following Saturday, after we had the hearing at the city council, I visited Hart Island. I've been 3 times since. All of them except my most recent visit was on standby. Okay? Prior to the hearing at city council, there were 3 boats a month. Now there are 5. The boat has a capacity of 50 persons, yet an average of only 24 people every month go to visit. The idea that there's this overwhelming demand of people to visit loved ones at Hart Island is a myth. The idea that there are 1 million people buried there is also a myth. If you take the number of years that burials have been happening on Hart Island, divide 1 million by the number of years, there would need to be 66,666 people per year buried, and that was never the case. Somebody put that number somewhere in some story, and it keeps getting repeated, and it's not accurate. It's a myth. Okay? People perjured themselves at the testimony at city council, saying that the officers guard you and have their hands on their guns. The officers don't even have their weapons. They wear their uniforms, okay? City councilman knows, when I went to Hart Island, I purposely didn't bring my photo ID because I wanted to see what would it be like if I was not a documented person. I said to the lady, the corrections officer, I have no photo ID. She said, I just need something with your name on it. I said, how about my debit card, my $25 cash card? I said, that has my name on it. She said, that'll do. So the idea that if I were not a citizen or didn't have photo ID that I'd be unable to visit my family is just wrong. Please, I'm speaking. Give me respect.
Nice.
So, the idea that, okay, I spoke to Susan, your very able secretary here at Community Board 10. I asked her if the 2015 petition was part of the record of the 2015 vote. She said it wasn't. So I don't think you should revisit 2015 because that panel has been terminated out. A new panel has been appointed. You sitting here today now are the representatives of Community Board 10, not the people who were here 4 years ago. But if that is the case, if you're going to, play backwards history, the 2015 petition should be part of the record. Okay. I have to disagree with my esteemed councilman, Mark Jonai, about the inmates doing the burial. I personally know people who were incarcerated on Rikers. And being able to work on Hart Island changed their lives. There are about 30 burials a month, and because people are buried in trenches, they're not hand-digging graves. The graves are dug by mechanical equipment that are operated by Department of Corrections staff. What the inmates do is stack the boxes. And we may think it's horrible, but nobody is forced to do this work. The major thing that people get to do at Hart Island is participate in a horticultural training program. And that has enabled people to, 1, get out of Rikers, be outside, take a bus ride to the island, take the ferry, work for 3 or 4 hours, have lunch, and then take the bus back. And it's a horticultural training program that they also get paid for. Right now in Albany, after the whole license plate debacle about what the inmates were being paid for license plates, Albany is reconsidering how inmates are paid for their labor. And that's an Albany jurisdiction thing. They're revisiting that. People who are incarcerated, their bills don't stop. Their kids need to eat while they're in jail. And that's all being revisited, not by this body, not by the city council, but by Albany. So, I thank you for giving me a chance to speak. And I have to say that this island is better maintained than the 2,772 acres at Pelham Bay Park. Everyone who volunteered, when I was on Hart Island on September 15th, an organization I usually volunteer with did a sweep of Pelham Bay Park cleaning up. They picked up 336 baby diapers. I mean, they did an inventory of what they pick up. We are not able to police and maintain the parks we already have. Hart Island needs to be maintained as a sacred space. The 9/11 repair work that has started under one city agency needs to stay. The families of the 40 AIDS victims who are buried there should be contacted because bodies are being disinterred on Hart Island. On September 15th, we saw an area where someone who had been buried 29 years ago was just disinterred the week before. So the city can contact those 40 families and say, no one would process your loved one's body when they died of AIDS back in the day, but they will now. Do you want to bring them home? Do you want to keep them in the city of New York on our Hart Island? And if so, how do you feel it's best to honor them? But the Parks Department said, and they said at the city council meeting, we don't want to manage a cemetery. Burials have to stop. This should not become a picnic ground. There should never be kayaking. As I heard this lady here tell a reporter that Hart Island would be a beautiful kayaking destination. No, it's a sacred place where an undetermined numbers of New Yorkers and people who visited New York and died while they were here are buried. It needs to stay a sacred place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well spoken. The next speaker.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there a time limit?
If our
There is,
two
but I have
esteemed
some work on it.
people from the city council could hand these letters to the EPA chair and the head of the council, I would just like to try to straighten out a little thing about Hart's Island. I think that no matter who's here, I've been around long enough to know Hart's Island. I officially did an environmental assessment of Hart's Island for the city council. I deemed it a very hazardous place. It's still a hazardous place. It has tremendous amount of hazards on it. I think that the new, I haven't heard yet from Council Mark Giangi what a FEMA consideration is here, but whatever it is, it's a scam. As most city islanders know, Hurricane Sandy came the opposite direction that affects Hart's Island. There was no damage on Hart's Island, so if they get FEMA money, somebody's doing something wrong. All our damage from Hart's Island comes by way of regular hurricanes, down the Sound. Okay? Now I can go back as far as when I was a young kid, that there was always beach erosion from the north side of the island, the northeast side of the island, and shows, body parts and everything else like this. I was given total access, could go anywhere I want, bring anybody I want to that island. I saw how they treated the inmates. The inmates were treated great. Most of it's done by backhoe. They do very little manual labor, and I think they're happy to be in it, and I think they got to be a year or under to, first of all, even be considered to be brought out there. So that's a mood issue to me. And it seems to me, and I think Kathy's going to get up next, with the support of the City Island people, I'm surprised Peter, instead of putting up the pictures, he'd say that he's a commander of the American Legion Post who stands 100% opposed to this transfer of Hart's Island. Thank you very much.
Wait, you didn't talk about the silos.
Oh, can you tell them what toxic
Oh.
waste is there?
Sure. There was missile silos. When I was a kid, you'd go underneath your desk as they raised the missile silos. Tommy might know, a few other people. There's jet fuel stored over there in Hart's Island. There's thousands of gallons of lead-based paint from the Navy. There's toxic waste, PCBs, oil, stuff that hasn't even been sampled by DEP because we just wanted to wash our hands of it on the island. And the most concerning part of it all as Kathy touched on it in a moment, the right side of that island, which is the southern side, which is not the burial part, was used in the early 80s to bury AIDS victims, AIDS babies, AIDS victims. But not only that, it was used for New York State and New York City to bury anything they did not understand. Many man-eaten diseases, people that turned green in the morgue, whatever it was buried on Hart's Island on the right side. And I stated all of this maybe 2-3 years ago to Melissa Hunt, who's behind me. And I applaud her hard work, but it's a losing effort, I think, because this island does not need to turn over to the Parks Department. It needs to remain underneath the Correction Department and just left alone. And there is plenty of room to keep another 150 years of burying people out there on Hart's Island. Thank you.
Point of information, do you need to live in the district to talk?
No.
Can I talk?
No, yes, you can. Yes.
Hi, I'm Melita Hunt. I'm just gonna respond to that.
But it's okay to heckle like you did to me?
Let's keep discussions to the committee, please. Thank you, no sidebars.
Okay.
Address
I
it to
did
Terrence.
look into the issue about the fuel.
Address to Terrence, please.
Okay, I
Thank you.
did look into the issue about the fuels. The Army Corps of Engineers went out there and filled those fuel tanks with concrete. They also sealed off the Nike missile sites a few years ago, and they submitted to New York State a request that the Nike missile site be on the National Historic Registry. The New York State Parks decided it would not be on the National Registry. It didn't qualify because it wasn't sufficiently intact. But the island as a whole has been accepted as eligible for National Historic Registry site in 3 out of 4 categories. The only category it didn't qualify for was burial of an important person. And we might find that there is somebody there. But most of the lead paint, based on your report, the city did take action and remove the lead paint. And I agree with him. The erosion has been there for many years, but it wasn't until Hurricane Sandy that funding was made available to New York State to pay for it. So that's why it has started now. There's been 30 years worth of erosion and human remains washing into the Long Island Sound. So that's the work that has just started now. So there is, I agree that there is, I think, a need to look at this burial process, and I think that the speaker's right in that we need to begin looking at this, and ending penal control doesn't mean the cemetery has to close.
They said it did.
Please be quiet.
Yes.
It's up to the elected officials to decide what the agency's jobs are. And it is really an important historic site going back to the Civil War. It's basically a Civil War era burial process that has served the city quite well because it allows for the city to return remains to families that request that return. And what she was speaking about was the disinterment of a Vietnam veteran by a man that he served with who got permission from the family and paid for it himself to move that veteran to be very close to his family in Buffalo. And I attended the reinterment of that veteran. So it's quite a complicated place, Hart Island. It's quite a beautiful place. And I think everybody has come together and wants the best for Hart Island. I really do think that the speaker and the mayor and the city council as a whole want for New York City to do right by its unclaimed dead. And I agree with Councilman Jonai that it's really bad public relations for the Department of Correction to remain in charge. It just looks terrible. And we're just better than that as a city. So there is, I think, there is an impetus here. And also, I do think that it'll become a place that the Bronx will be proud of because it is a Civil War site. The first United States colored troops were trained there, who went and fought in the South and fought for their own freedom, you know. And there's a lot of veterans who are very, very attached to Hart Island. And I've even had a cemetery care company contact me that they received, they work with training veterans on how to bury the dead. They've done contracting for Arlington National Cemetery. And they would like to employ veterans using GI funds to work on Hart Island. That would replace inmates, and I think that would fix it completely. So there are real options for keeping it as a cemetery that will come out with the RFI. So I encourage, we don't have to decide everything tonight.
You can't.
But there is a real thoughtfulness that's required here, and people, I think, need to slow down and calm down a little bit on this and let the city heal.
I'd like to ask Melinda a question. What's the difference whether it's under the control of Department of Corrections or Department of Parks?
It's really a public.
What changes?
I hope that Parks will contract with companies that conduct these burials. Even private cemeteries hire contractors who perform these services. And I think that will change it. If the public doesn't have to contact the Department of Correction, you are required to show ID. Maybe they relax that day, but there are these regulations that go with it being a penal, under jurisdiction of a penal facility, that the Department of Corrections is required to impose because they operate secure facilities. All of those go away when it becomes Parks jurisdiction. And even though Parks doesn't want it, they are the most qualified agency, and they do operate 2 active cemeteries in New York City. Prospect Park has an active cemetery that is parkland that's managed privately, and Prospect Cemetery in Queens is also parkland and is managed by a private nonprofit. So there is a way of doing, I mean, the National Park Service manages all the national cemeteries, so there are models for this, especially if it is a National Historic Site. I think the city could get the National Park Service to assist with this. And I think it would just make it a really important historic site for New York City. And that's all of our concerns is to preserve this place as an honorable place for us to care for our fellow citizens.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may?
Yes.
If everybody wants to be heard, may I have the mic? If everybody wants to be heard, they have to keep their comments down to a minute, maybe a minute and a half. It's been 25 minutes, and we only heard from 4 people, and I know other people want to be heard, so there has to be some control. We're gonna be here till midnight.
Going forward, let's keep it under 2 minutes.
You don't get to go, John.
We've heard 2 impassioned folks on both sides, so from now on, I think maybe we just do a 2-minute rule.
Yeah, 2 minutes as of.
Can I get
Well,
my 2 minutes?
The city island, the people that live in the community aren't getting to speak as long as the people that
Can-
don't live here.
Mr. Chair, can I do a point of order? I am here on the community board. I am part of Parks and Recreation Committee, and I'm part of Municipal Service Committee. I represent Community Board 10, geographically, all of it. Not some of it, not part of it, all of it. So I just want to clarify that. I'm not representing a specific part. I'm not representing a specific issue. I am a member of the board, all inclusive. That's all, I wanted it on the record, that's all I have to say on the issue.
Well, thank you. Miss, did you want to speak?
Yes, please.
The battery's, it's red, Matt, I don't know if it needs a new
That's
battery or
a
not.
sign of.
It's battery died.
That's all right.
Dying.
Oh, you got 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, the people from City Council that came. I was at both hearings for the Hart Island Bills,
No one swore in Captain Thompson to ask him how many people visit Hart Island a month. I could answer that question. 24 people a month visit. Everything that Kathy Sweat said, I visited Hart Island with her. In 2015, Melinda Hunt from the Hart Island Project came to our civic meeting. I wasn't at that meeting.
2014.
14 came to our meeting and, as Tom said, requested it was for people to be able to visit their families at their grave sites, because at the time they couldn't. During and the community that was there and that was aware voted for that. There weren't many people there. A lot of city islanders were not aware that this was going on. It went to Community Board 10. After it went to Community Board 10, articles started to come out how it would become a public park. My friend Teresa and I went around City Island with petitions, and I have them still here from 2015. Since we're readdressing 2015, the bill no longer exists. The difference between 2015 and now is that the ACLU won their case to have families visit the grave, and they now can.
Well, you always could, but now they're regularly scheduled.
But,
Says please, no interruptions, please.
so, they can visit the grave. City Islanders, we filled out Councilman's survey. It's only been 10 days. I have about 240 with me. Many from City Islanders that live on Fordham Street, who would affect, it's a very small street. We live on a small island that is a summertime destination. We do not have police. We have some police, but we share with the 45th precinct. We can no longer pack 10 pounds of potatoes into 5 pounds of City Island. We live there. We need emergency services. People that live on Fordham Street need this. Hart Island was open. I probably know it better than most people in this room. I went there when I was a kid. I climbed in the missile silos. I went to the park. My friend's father ran Phoenix House. Yeah, so now, this is unfortunate that City Islanders are not speaking as long as someone that came here.
Yes.
This is very unfortunate.
Just give me your.
I can have her 2 minutes?
No, we can't do that.
No,
One
I mean,
person, yes.
one person,
If they wanna
2
speak,
minutes.
they raise their hand.
Let's go to the next person, please. I'm sorry.
Give me-
This is crazy.
Go ahead. 2
My name is
minutes.
Teresa Kurtz. I live on City Island, and I have a few problems with these bills. They don't seem to have any parameters to them. There's no plans. It's a plan to make a plan. And I think that leaves it wide open to be anything. And for that reason, I'm totally opposed. I've visited. Corrections is respectful, and they maintain it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next person.
Next person.
Yes, sir.
2 minutes.
So I'm gonna, thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you. So I was talking about how well maintained this thing is. I'll just leave this here for everybody. I have some comments here. I mean, obviously, you guys all know I've been extensively involved in this. I think everyone knows that. I was involved in pushing this in community board in 2014, city council, everything else. I'd love to sit here and talk about family members like Elaine Joseph here and the access they should have. But since we have to start with the City Island focus, because there's been a lot of fear spread in the community about what this package of bills is and what it isn't. There is no Ferris wheel being proposed on this bill. No funnel cakes, no Coca-Cola, no skating rinks, no concert venues, no ball fields, barbecue areas, or areas for sunbathing. No one is trying to turn this into an extension of Orchard Beach. No one is trying to turn this into Disneyland. This is about creating an area that will be protected in its current form, allow for greater access for family members and the general public to visit, not under armed guard, and to protect City Island from the past proposals that have been put in, and I'll pass this around, of some of the past proposals, that have caused upheaval and opposition. Former Councilman James Vacca, who supported this legislation until his last day in office, proven fact, said, "I think this protects this island in perpetuity." That's what we're here to do now. Bob, here answers your question. The bills from both the 2014 and now, these bills are the exact same, verbatim. The only thing they change is 180 days on one to a numerical 180 days. I'll leave these here, part of my submission. So that is not true as well. And it's important to say, just because something is parkland, it doesn't mean, quote, break up the grill and the sunscreen, as some here have said. In fact, someone would be surprised to learn that 90% of Pelham Bay Park is not developed. The threat of something being parkland is obviously minimal from some of the worst case scenarios that have been proposed in the past. In 2010, I went down to the city council. I said at the time, it's in my testimony, you can check it online, I hope there would be a transparent framework from stakeholders on all sides to discuss future uses and accessibility of the land. I'm pleased that the legislation has changed on the second bill to have that traffic plan. Part of the legislative package is very different. And while I've always thought that it's somewhat of unfounded fear about the boats, I think 25, 50 passengers, I understood the need to proceed with caution. The new bills make no mention of City Island in the traffic plan, so I'm assuming they'll be examining alternatives from what I think is now appropriate. Obviously, any access through City Island would need to be restricted, and weekend evenings should be restricted through Memorial Day and Labor Day. I'm going to leave this with you. I'm not going to go over time. And I just, as I step off here, I just wanted to apologize. I mean, Melinda has really been savaged in her intentions, and the other people. I'm going to leave this here so everyone gets a sample of some of the social media poison that goes around. Thank you.
Sir, I forgot to give you these are all petitions from City Islanders.
If they're old positions, I can't take them.
No, I have the new and the old.
These are current.
I have new and the old.
Just want the new.
I need the new only.
You don't want
This is from
2015?
2015, no.
No.
Aren't we
No, they're
doing
not
2015 now?
No.
You can't, they're only gonna see.
You already spoke, sir.
No, but we get an opportunity to ask John a question.
No.
No.
That's not That's different meeting. That's not a question meeting.
On the point, because they bring up 2015,
Excuse me,
check the
your
package, it
time is
is
up.
in the package, it is part of the record for 2019. Thank you.
Start talking. Okay, hello, my name is Lauren, and I actually live on Fordham Street. I just bought a house. My bedroom, I could see Hart Island. I would like it to be open. I support the bills, and I also think that it is important to discuss that while the Civic Association may have voted on it, there has been internal dynamics on City Island, which I'm sure you all know about. And so the votes that you might have received, or the vote of the Civic, likely doesn't give a representative, so just making sure you know that. Let's see what else I wanna do with my 2 minutes. I really appreciate you guys all being here and thinking it through. I don't think it's a easy decision. And I think that's all I have to say.
Just want to ask one question, Lawrence. You said there's Civic and another faction, is that what you're saying?
All I said was that the Civic has not been supportive of all voices.
Okay.
So there are people who are. And I thank you for letting me think a little bit more. As a resident of Fordham Street, a lifelong resident for the rest of my life, there is enough parking. There's actually a vacant lot. And on top of that, as you do your cost benefit analysis, I urge you to talk to our small businesses, which are chronically vacant, and think about what a family would do if they were to come to visit their dead family member or just access the Serene Place, because you mentioned that there's a mental health crisis. So you might get a cup of coffee from our new coffee shop, you might go to the island, and then you might go and have dinner. That would support our economic development, because I want to live on an island that has more than one bar. Thank you guys.
Next.
Next.
Pass the mic up to the lady in the blue sweater.
Yes, it is. No parking.
If you're gonna have side discussions, please take them outside.
Thank you so much for the recognition. I live on City Island. I'm new to City Island, and I just it's a little incredible to me when Councilman Rodriguez proposes a bill that our own councilman was opposed to, and expressed that. So my question is, what is the agenda for Councilman Rodriguez to bring this bill forth in the city council when he doesn't represent us or the district, or is not even near the district? So my concerns are outside agendas. Another thing I'm concerned about is the Hart Island becoming a parks and having a nonprofit raise the funds, get all that money, and maybe hand out some of the vendor licenses, somehow it makes you wonder what the agenda is. And again, I just wanted to bring up those 2 points. We are also trying very desperately to have a harbor patrol come into, you all are very aware of that. It was on Hart Island, it was there, and I hate to see that taken away from a possibility by going into another agency as opposed to a complementary city agency like the Department of Corrections. These guys have to lock up their weapons, you know, and that ferry is secure. That whole area is very secure. They have to lock up somewhere. Please don't take that option away from us as a permanent harbor patrol base. We don't have it in the Bronx. Do you know that? Everybody else, every borough has it. We don't. And we have Orchard Beach and Eastchester Bay. My God, but what a no-brainer. So if you give it to the Department of Parks, we lose the option of a permanent harbor patrol there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Next. I see you, I recognize your hand, ma'am, but there was another one on this side.
That's okay.
You okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Miss?
Okay, no problem. Resident on City Island, Fordham Street, 44 years. Resident on Mendeford Avenue, another 25 years, okay? Parking, 17 families on my block alone don't have driveways. I don't go out at night anymore because I know tonight when I come home, I will find a place to park. We don't have the luxury of driveways. So, plus the fact, narrow block, the most busiest block on City Island is Fordham Street, east and west. East and west. Ask my husband how many times his car has been hit because of traffic and people can't passing. I'm up to here on people. I'm up to here on people during the summer. I'm up to here on people during the traffic times. As far as the parks go, they have enough trouble with what they have to maintain just around Orchard Beach, City Island, Shore Road area. I spoke to the young lady here. The weeds overgrow the roadways. You can't even get on the highway without having to go over to another lane. Trees that are dead, that are overhanging our roadways that can come down anytime and kill us. I don't have objections to the changeover so much, but I want to know what the plan is. I don't want a ferry down 40th Street to be hustling all these people. Where are we going to park all these cars that these people coming here to do? That's what I want to know. Fordham Street is choking on cars. Choking. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Any other people?
Oh, do you want to?
No, you can. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, my name is Steve Suzuki. I'm a lifelong resident of City Island. I've lived on City Island for 33 years. I actually lived on Fordham Street for 5 years, almost 5 years, just under 5 years. I have also been to Hart Island just once as part of, I think it was the community board. And I am in favor of the legislation transferring it. The condition of the island is unacceptable. Corrections has not maintained it. And I'll keep it short. I would just say.
That wasn't Jim.
Okay.
Sorry.
I would just say that there are actually a number of people on City Island who do support the legislation or don't care either way. There is a very vocal minority of people who oppose it. They're very passionate in their opposition. That's their right. But a lot of the information that they're putting out there is not accurate. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Anyone else? Before-
Hi, good evening. My name's Linda Baldwin. I'm also a City Island resident. And I'm here just to make sure that, not everybody can make the Civic Association meetings and that there is a diversity of opinion. I respect my neighbors for their opinion. I know that it's a very contentious topic. And my point of view is we should have a study. We should find out what mitigation measures can be put in place, and that even though we have a lot at stake in making sure that whatever is put in place doesn't affect us as City Islanders, I also respect the need for family members to be comfortable in visiting their loved ones, and I think that's a need that goes beyond City Island per se, and that I know there's a way to accommodate both. And I don't think we should let our fear of the unknown keep us from exploring options that take care of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, more of this stuff. I don't know if it was, actually, I was hoping that you'd ask the staff questions. Full disclosure, I am not supporting a park being built, and what I think we're losing here, it's not being transferred to the park department. This has not, the bill is not saying it will be owned by Parks Department. The jurisdiction
will be in parks.
is going to be in parks. So having the ownership and title, if you will, be transferred to Parks Department is a whole other game. So this is just about jurisdiction and not about transferring to the agency ownership rights, if you will. That's for one. And when it was first brought to my attention and hearing the concerns, we took surveys that were pretty much wide open, aside from the vote that was recently done at the Civic Association. And that's why I felt it was so important to come to the board, Chairman, both Chairman, so that there's a, you're the proper and recognized the community, the community board authority that would, should have a say. And based on what we hear tonight, you'll ultimately make a decision. But for full disclosure, almost 455 people voted, of which 87% were opposed to the transfer. Maybe not understanding, is this transferring agency, is this just transferring jurisdiction? And down the board, when I asked exact questions as the 4 bills that were presented, overwhelmingly the fear of what could happen is something that the community is not willing to accept. So I understand the concerns, I understand both sides of the issue. I'm happy to take the lead based on what I hear tonight at this committee will dictate my next step. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Yes, Bob.
Okay, I'd like to make a couple of motions if I may. First, on intro 909B, the transportation plan, I would like to make a motion that the community board send a letter of support for 909B, that a transportation plan be developed along as, or as long as a community input is included in that transportation plan.
We voted against that.
Can I get a second on that motion for a transportation plan to be developed?
Point of order, Joe, may I? Point of order?
Go ahead, yes.
Can you reiterate what the purpose of this meeting was? Because were we to vote on each of these bills?
Well, we're not to vote on each of these bills, but Bob's point is, do we want to, maybe it's the right way to do it, let's look at each bill individually and take it from there. I mean, there's been enough discussion around the fact that the bill we already approved, back in 2015 is the same as 909, as 906A, so that, but these other bills are additions to that were not reflected back in 2015. So, my initial idea was that we look at the 2015 bill and then move forward and then move forward from there based on that. But if the committee wants to look at these bills now, to Bob's point, then we can. If you guys don't, then don't either table his motion or don't second it.
I need a second before we can have discussion though. Second. Okay, so on the question of why we should do this. If we do not put our input in now, we may never get a chance. So the transportation plan may go ahead without community input. I'd like to make sure that we put it out there that we only would support this bill with community input. So that's why I proposed it as I did.
And that's my point, and that's why for years I've been in favor of this, but now I would vote to reopen the question because I think the transportation study needs to be done first. And it needs to be determined first as to alternate means of accessing the island before we turn it over to the island.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not arguing with that. However, I still have a problem with changing a vote that the board voted on in the past. Because that opens up everything we've ever done. You gotta keep that in mind. There's no vote that we've ever taken that you can't say, well, you know what, I didn't like that answer. Let's look at it again. Because it really shouldn't happen that way. So, we have three other bills here that are being proposed. that we have an option to have a say in that would actually solve the problem.
Right, and
Of the first one.
can you word it that the transportation study should be done first? Prior to
I
the
don't
transfer of
I don't know if I can or not. I don't know, can we?
Let's, cause they know where they're, what,
We voted against everything on civic.
The civic first supported it.
we wanted to get your input before we go any further with, cause you mentioned the 3 bills that were currently available. Can we get the mic back?
Yep.
Sorry.
The question is, are these bills gonna be voted concurrently, or can we say, okay, let's do 909B first, get an approval on that, and get community input in before we proceed to 9068 in city council? Or before city council proceeds, not us.
Yes.
So the transportation plan, that bill goes into effect on the date that the transfer goes into effect. Part of the issue is, understanding.
So they gotta go together.
Yeah, exactly.
They're tail
Okay,
ended
so
each
that
other.
answers that question, we don't have a choice. So either transportation is gonna go into effect without us having a say, or we can vote to have a say right now.
But
So we have a bill, we
the
have a
question
motion
is-
on the
is-
floor with a second.
The question is the city council gonna observe what we have to say about the transportation bill?
That's always advisory, and you know that,
Right.
okay? But if we're gonna have a say, we have to ask for it. So we have a motion on the floor to ask for it.
Yes, let's ask. We can always ask.
Can you call for a
Ask is
vote?
good. Call for a vote
On
on
the
can
first
you- can
motion
you
on
read-
909B?
But can you repeat what I'm being asked to vote on?
Yes. You're being asked to vote on a letter of support for the transportation plan 909B, Bill 909B, for ferry service to Hart Island with community input. We would support that bill. Only with community input would we support that bill. That's what you're being asked to vote on.
And I think, we're here for 2 things. First of all, there's a resolution. Like, are we tabling then? Cause in essence, if we do what you say and vote on yet a new motion, we're in effect tabling resolution, I guess,
B.
item 3B. That's what that calls for. So I don't think we can address that.
I think item 3B is invalid, to be perfectly honest.
Well,
I
then
don't
that's,
think it's a valid
fine, then
resolution,
that's
but-
what we have to vote on
Okay.
before we start adding things as a prerequisite, because when you add those things, then you're saying we're tabling 3B.
Okay.
I mean, am I
understand that.
wrong about that?
I think, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, you know better than me, but I think table the discussion on Bob's resolution until you vote on 3B.
Right.
And then we can untable his resolution, either vote no or vote yes from there.
Well, the
Right, because
resolution
it's
that's on
just-
the
it's-
agenda should be first, you're absolutely right.
So
Okay.
should I read the resolution?
So let's start with the
Yeah.
resolution that's
Okay.
there first, and we'll put the other resolution on hold. until we finish.
Motion to table Bob's resolution first.
On table Bob's resolution first. Motion to table Bob's resolution until we've read over and approved the resolution that's already on the table and.
Or voted on, not approved.
Voted on, and point 3B.
Okay.
Oh,
I'll second that.
okay.
All in favor?
So, let me